So it was about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, that Russian troops moved into eastern Ukraine. And throughout the West, Western media reported this as a totally unprovoked act of aggression. Who could have seen it coming? But there was, if you paid very close attention, one political group in the United States that had a different explanation for it. And it was a group a lot of people would dismiss as fringe, a group called the African People's Socialist Party. And to be honest, we'd never heard of them. But around this time, they started releasing videos with a different view. Those videos were critical of the United States and NATO, and they pointed out that there was, in fact, a history here, and that NATO had been expanding eastward for quite some time and putting a lot of pressure on Russia. Now, you may agree or disagree with that, but they had a coherent view of it. And to give you an example of what that view was, here's video from the group's chairman, a man called Omali Yeshitela. Watch.
There's a discussion about Russian military border buildup on its border with Ukraine, and how this represents a terrible threat to Ukraine by Russians. But there is no acknowledgement of the history that took us to this place, how the U.S. overthrew, participated in facilitating the overthrow of a government in Ukraine that was friendly to the Soviet Union. Nor does it talk about the history of this relationship between Ukraine and Russia. And you have to remember that they're using NATO here too. And NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was something that came into existence to deal with the Soviet Union, or Soviet Russia as it used to be called. And so this is an ongoing aggression. It did not just start. It's been going on for a while, but the U.S. government relies on the ignorance of the people in this country and much of the world that's facilitated by people like Zuckerberg.
So you can agree or disagree with that analysis. A couple parts of it are indisputably true. One, the U.S. government does rely on the ignorance of its population to do things in that population's name that the population doesn't want. Start all kinds of pointless wars, for example, get people killed, bankrupt the government. That's all real. It's also true that there is a history in Ukraine, and you may or may not think it justifies Russian aggression, but there's no question that NATO has been moving eastward, and it's hard to see why, what benefit there is to the NATO member states. In any case, that's a point of view, agree with it or not. But for some reason, the FBI was watching. They were watching, and they considered sentiments like that not just wrong or offensive, but a crime. And so 3 months later, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, our federal law enforcement tasked with keeping us safe, spent its time, and a lot of agents, it looked to be dozens of agents, raiding the home and the office of the man you just saw speaking, as well as the homes of 6 other members of his organization. Dozens of heavily armed agents descended with automatic weapons. They used flashbang grenades and drones. The first thing they did when they broke in, when they smashed the door, was to tape over the internal security cameras so there would be no record of what they were doing. And then they walked off with a huge amount of material. They stole things from Yeshitela and his wife and a bunch of other people who work for this organization. Then they handcuffed them and led them away. This is how they described the experience at the time.
They handcuffed me and my wife out here. They wanted me to sit on the curb while they were carrying this out, something that I refused to do. They wanted my wife to sit on the curb out here, that she refused to do.
As I was coming out, this big old drone met me.
The only revolutionary organization that's done something here on the ground practically for African people is the one that's come under attack. Institution that offers a community radio station, a newspaper, a commercial kitchen, an Aquaba Hall rental space, and community office for our organizers. That was the building that has come under attack.
So if you're watching this video right now, the chances are that you're probably not a revolutionary black nationalist. We're not, obviously. But you may be an American, and if you are an American, or if you believe in the idea of America, you should care about this case. Why? Because of the charges. Now, typically in situations like this, when the city of Philadelphia, for example, incinerated the entire MOVE community back in the 80s, when the U.S. government under Bill Clinton killed all the Branch Davidians and their children at Waco, when federal agents murdered Randy Weaver's wife and child and shot his dog, there's some pretext for doing it. There's a gun charge. They were caught with bomb-making materials. There's some weird sex stuff going on. They're child pornographers. It's human trafficking. They at least bother to tell you a story that makes you stop asking more questions because you think to yourself, well, these people were obviously very bad. They did something that was a legit felony, and they probably got what was coming to them. What's so interesting about this case is that the government under Joe Biden is not even pretending that they did anything illegal. There's no actual crime here. No one has been charged with bomb making or hurting anyone or any act of violence, no act of embezzlement or theft. What they're charged with is liking Russia, is having opinions that the Biden administration doesn't want them to have, saying things that they're not supposed to say in public. So even if you're not a revolutionary black nationalist, you should care deeply about this case, because first they come for people like this, people on the fringe, and then they come for you. The details of the story are even more shocking than we're describing, and we're going to get them from the man at the very center of it, Omali Yeshitela, the chairman of this group, the man now accused of being a Russian agent and about to go on trial. We're honored to have him join us now. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. This is an important interview for us. It helps us to break out of this encirclement, information encirclement that has been imposed on us by the U.S. government. And when we talk about the ignorance of the people being a factor here, part of the way to keep the people ignorant is to keep them from participating in discussion.
Yes.
Because the attack on my right to speak is also an attack on the right of the people to hear. So I have something to say. People may, as you said, agree or not agree with it, but at least they can have opinions that are informed opinions about agreeing or not agreeing with me. But when they use grenades and battering rams and armored vehicles and assault weapons and things like that to keep me from talking, and when they talk about putting me in prison for 15 years, which is the equivalent of a life sentence for me, this is designed to keep the people from hearing what I have to say. And it's a real testimony, in my opinion, of the fragility of a social system that cannot tolerate a discussion coming from somebody from one of the most economically depressed sector of the city of St. Louis. So it's all a falsification. I wanted to say, first of all, that our lawyers, for the purpose of making this defense, had to move forward and say that even if we did what they said we did, that the First Amendment protects us. But I want to say beyond that, that they fabricated most of what they say, that they're lying. It's mostly a fabrication, and that they are politically motivated in doing what they have done because of internal crisis and crisis in the existing global system that sees forces like China and Russia, and increasingly even countries like Iran, countries like Venezuela are challenging the hegemony of a country that has held that for the longest period of time, has been the big hegemon. And so I think this is a domestic crisis that's represented by what we see happening inside this country right now. And what we see being partially responsible for it by forces around the world who are challenging the ability of the United States to continue to be the big dog here. I think that's what we're looking at. And then, of course, there's the immediate personal interests of a guy who's running for president, re-election, and who is also attempting to escape the moniker of being sleepy. So, I mean, I think these are some of the factors that informs much of what's happening right now.
One of the great and beautiful things of this moment that we're living in is that we can sort of put aside some of our preconceptions, and I'm sure there's a lot we disagree on. I don't think I disagree with a single word that you just said. I thought it was very nicely put and wise. And I just want to say for the record, I agree with you. This is a sign of fragility of the regime. Confident rulers don't act like this. So I had to say that, but I just want to get to the facts of it quickly. So am I misreading this? I think your lawyer is right. Even if you are guilty of what they accuse you of doing, you're not guilty of any crime because you're not accused of violence, theft, no conventional crime. You're accused of having the wrong opinions. Am I missing something?
Well, yeah, because what they've said is that even if what we said was true, even if it's disinformation, we're accused of spewing Russian disinformation. And they have said that even if we said what we said is true, it still amounts to disinformation. So they're not necessarily accusing us of lying. They're accusing us of talking.
Right.
So, I mean, that's an extraordinary, it's an illegal document. When we've appealed this thing, and we immediately went to court on this thing after 9 months of being held in a kind of legal purgatory, where we were just unindicted co-conspirators, which meant that we didn't have legal standing, and we couldn't go to court and say, hey, these people have just looted us, and they have handcuffed us, and they've shut down entire neighborhoods, refused to allow people to enter their homes. This is pre-dawn, or leave without showing identification. They've done all of these things, and we can't go to court and complain about it because we have no legal standing, because for 9 months we weren't charged with anything. They've just stolen all of these materials. They've looted our files. They've taken laptops and iPads and iPhones and things like that. So it's 9 months before they even indict us. And before that, they offered a $10 million bounty for any information that on the man, Alexander Ionov, who they said was the Russian for whom we were working, and on anybody who could provide information on us. They offered a $10 million bounty. And this is even after they've stolen, looted everything they've got. They have no case because there is nothing there. It's a totally fabricated case that they've made against us, and it's extraordinarily dangerous because, like what you said, first of all, just to be historically factual, the Second Amendment was not something that was written for me or Black people. I mean, the fact is that the law that governed most of the relationship for the longest period of time was something that came out in 1857, Supreme Court ruling around Dred Scott, which was right here in St. Louis, where the court ruled that Black man had no rights that a white man had to respect. This is when Dred Scott fought that getting to St. Louis, which was supposed to have been a no-slave state, would mean that he was free after leaving a place where he had been enslaved. The court said, no, you have no rights. And so that was in 1857. And what it took to overturn that ruling was not another court ruling immediately, but a civil war. And so this is what has informed our relationship. So we have now de jure rights, but de facto has not been the case. And that's why you can look at all of the data, the statistics revolving around the conditions of existence of African people in this country comparatively, and you see that it's only by law that we're supposed to have rights, but in fact, these rights don't exist. And what I have done and what our organization has done is move from this simpering kind of a politic that's based on pleading and begging and trying to come into the system based on some assumption that the contradiction is racism, or the ideas or the opinions that white people have about Black people. What I have done and said, that's not the fundamental contradiction. The fundamental contradiction is colonialism. It's domestic colonialism. And it applies right here in this country, where foreign and alien power kidnapped me. That somebody like to talk about this country being a country of, how do they call it, immigrants. But we're not immigrants. We were captives and brought here in chains. And the only group other than the indigenous people themselves who didn't come here looking for a better way of life. People may or may not like what I'm saying or agree with it, and that's all right. I'm saying it, and the point is the United States government attacked me, and they used this assault with the assumption that there are a lot of white people who don't like what I'm saying and therefore will agree with what the government is doing, despite the fact there are no facts to substantiate what they're claiming that we did. And so this is the kind of public opinion that they think will weigh in their favor. But the point is that the Second Amendment and the constitutional rights, free speech, freedom of assembly, protection from what is it called? This attack on illegal search and seizure. This was done for groups of people who had left England and left other places and left the despotism of kings and things like that, and wanted to have some rights. And so they made these rights. But these rights also were given to them on indigenous land, where Black people, had done much of the work to build on this land, et cetera. They were not for us. It was only a bloody struggle that Black people were involved in, where our churches were bombed, leaders assassinated, just for trying to join Joe Biden's party. And so now we're at this place where they are coming at Second Amendment rights that were not made for me, but were made for white people. And that means that if this door is open.
But may I ask you a question though?
Yeah.
So, but this is being done by the administration that tells us constantly how much they love and worship Black people. They love Black people. No one's ever done more for Black people than the Biden administration. And no one has cheered that on more loudly than the New York Times and the Washington Post, which also love Black people, probably a lot more than you do. So have they come to your defense at all? Like any of these?
Not at all.
Yeah, why? That's kind of weird.
No, and it's a real serious kind of contradiction that this is able to occur. And especially, we talk about Biden, if we just take it on a personal level, which is not necessarily where I was intending to go, but if you take it just on a personal level, we're talking about Biden, who claims to be the great liberal, a white man who loves us. We're talking also about the guy who was opposed to the Civil Rights Bill, talking about the guy who was opposed to busing because he didn't want his children to have to go to school in a jungle, et cetera, just on a personal level. And but here, they have never had to offer African people anything. When they run for office, it's not because they're offering us anything, they're frightening Black people. They say, if you don't vote for us, you're going to get Trump, who is a demon, or you're going to get the Republicans, who are demons, or you're going to get what we characterize as fascism, et cetera. So they don't have to promise Black people anything, except they swear they'll protect us from the other white people. That's one aspect of it. And then there's a whole body of folk who are employed through things like welfare, slavery, and programs that they create it's a whole array of folk that employ liberals based on that. And what we stand for is self-determination. We also believe in reparation, but the point is that we have in St. Louis alone, we have in 7 contiguous blocks in St. Louis, economically depressed sector, we purchased something like 20 some odd properties, and we put businesses and other kinds of things there. That's not permissible. We are supposed to get in line for welfare or something like that. And we are teaching African people that you can be self-determining. There is an alternative to what you got. But the whole Democratic Party apparatus rests upon this foundation of welfare slavery, and this is where they would have Black people located. And so the Democratic Party, you can't say that they lied to us, whether it was Obama or whether it was this guy, Biden. You can't say they lied to us because they didn't promise us anything, except they would protect us from Trump, from the Republican Party. And I'm not a Trump person or Republican person. I'm for the liberation of Black people, and that's why this whole thing about working for Russians is so ridiculous. I'm not looking for another master. I'm trying to get rid of the whole relationship that presupposes that we will be servants of anybody.
I mean, given that you haven't actually done anything, you're not accused of doing anything that isn't already legal, exercising rights that are guaranteed to you from birth till death under the U.S. Constitution, I'm a little bit surprised that nobody has defended you in the U.S. media. Now, I will say your name sounds non-mainstream of your organization, but once you learn,
like Obama.
Yeah, right, exactly. Fair. Barack Hussein Obama. But once you learn the details of this, you'd think there would be at least one civil libertarian at the New York Times editorial page or the Washington Post or NBC News or CNN or any of these groups. Has anybody said a word about an armored personnel carrier showing up at your house for speaking, for talking?
No, we've had to go out and really work. I mean, in July of this year, we had a meeting, a conference, and we pulled together something like 40 different organizations and what have you to unite as a part of a free speech, anti-colonial free speech movement who are pushing back on this. And I think that includes one organization of lawyers and what have you. But generally speaking, we haven't been able to get anything. Even so-called progressive black politicians and what have you have not stepped forward. But you also got to remember, we're talking about a period where it's impermissible even to say things. Well, you can say from sea to shining sea. You cannot say from how's it go, from the river? Is it from the river to the sea? You know. I mean, it's incredible. The attack that's being made on the right to people of speech. And by the way, as a point of information, I've been arrested several times on the question of speech. I was arrested in Florida. They created a law called incitement to riot. Didn't have to be a riot. I just had to want one to happen when I spoke. I mean, they put me in jail and threatened to put me in prison for having done that. So this question of speech is a really critical issue, and people need to pay attention. I was under assault in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1996. Some 300 cops, National Guard troops attacked our building, set houses on fire, used all kinds of machinations, including the FBI, because they were concerned that we were protesting and speaking out against police having killed an 18-year-old youngster, and the grand jury having said it was all right for that to occur. And we were having a meeting, and they didn't want me to talk. And so they attacked the building. They said, in our own building, they said that you have something like 5 minutes to get out of the building because this is an illegal meeting. We own the building. And so they attacked it. So the free speech question, and that the problem is they did this in plain view. People saw it happen. They brought, the people in the community actually brought a helicopter down by gunfire. This is how intense it was. And not a single civil libertarian stepped forward to say, why are you attacking these people for just speech?
Well, but I'm confused. So you're describing basically what the Black Lives Matter people said 4 years ago. Some of them got legit rich out of it. You don't seem like you've gotten rich. And they got all this money from Apple and the biggest companies in the world. And of course, the media cheerled them. How did you miss out on that?
Well, because the thing is, like, to say Black Lives Matter is such an empty slogan. It's a whine rather than a demand. It's empty. I mean, Joe Biden says Black Lives Matter. I mean, you got the whole Democratic Party, Congress and whatever, get out on one knee with kente cloth from Ghana over their shoulder saying Black Lives Matter. Because it doesn't mean anything. It's a non-statement. But what we say is Black people have to have power. So we want power over our own life. That's the question. And that's the basis for the difference in how they would treat Black Lives Matter and how they would treat us. And you're right. The Black Lives Matter slogan is almost a Zuckerberg manufactured slogan. Certainly if it's not manufactured by Zuckerberg, it's certainly promoted by Zuckerberg and all the white people who love us.
So tell us about what else. I wasn't aware of this. I was talking to someone on your staff this morning. It's not just the government that went after you. And I should say, you haven't gone on trial. You're not convicted of anything. I mean, you're not a criminal. Okay. But it sounds like business has aligned against you as well. If you wouldn't mind explaining what's happened.
Yeah, right. I mean, we've been sanctioned by banks like we are some kind of hostile country. The banks that we've done more than 20 years of businesses with, we've never missed a payment. We really disciplined in terms of taking care, and sometimes paid earlier than what was due. And the banks, Regions Banks, one big bank that they kicked us off. Some members of our movement, their personal accounts have shut down. They shut us down. They forced the payment of something like an $80,000 mortgage thing that we had, and we were given something like 2 weeks to pay it off. We've had similar things happening from another bank. We've had some 130,000 signatures that have been collected on petitions that were calling on people to take the United States before the United Nations for violation of the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. They were taken down, disappeared, because, as you know, the U.S. government claims that the work that we were doing on a tour, participating with the United Nations trip throughout the United States in 6 cities, and we were collecting petitions on that and talking about reparations, that the Russians paid us to do that. So they took that down. I guess it must be some kind of evidence of a crime that we committed. We don't know. It just disappeared. And then in terms of, and that was just one of the banks, by the way. There was another bank that did a similar thing. And just recently, we had a situation where within the last week or so, 10 days at least, the fiscal, how do you characterize it, sponsor that we use, because we really want to have this thing to be quite transparent and quite above board, because we've had to spend $200 and just about $250,000 already just in legal fees alone. And we have this process where people can make contributions to us. And the fiscal sponsor that has been dealing with something like 600 different entities that they function as fiscal sponsors of, suddenly decided they were going out of business. And of the 6 top, we were 5 or 6 among the top forces in terms of money going into that. And others of them have not, the 5 of them have not even been operational for the last 2 years. So they decided they were going out of business. There's a whole bunch of coincidences happened. Coincidence that the church right across the street from my house that they attacked on July 29th, that church, coincidentally, where it had been empty for ages, and we had it under contract to purchase it in order to put programs in for the community there. That church mysteriously burned down. And then this attack on us on July 29th followed an attack on July 2nd, 2029, where a 50-foot flagpole hosting a 15 by 25-foot red, black, and green African national flag was torched in broad daylight. And the guy who torched it wasn't even charged with arson. It was some kind of criminal mischief thing. I mean, it's just a host of attacks that's been made over us. And sometimes the government and sometimes financial institutions like Regions Bank, where we've had demonstrations and what have you, but they are moving, it seems, to, first of all, make us spend money that we've been using to put programs on the ground. For example, on the day they attacked us, that same morning, later that morning, we had scheduled training for African women who were becoming doulas, being trained to become doulas, people who take care and make safe birth for women and for the children. In St. Louis, we have a situation where there are enough black babies dying in the first year of life to fill 15 kindergarten classes. So we're having this doula training. They attack our building, they attack our home. That did happen, but we've initiated a process where we bought properties, where we are setting up a women's center, things like that. That's the kind of stuff that they're attacking. And so they would divert the money that we would have for these programs. and you need to come to St. Louis. By the way, I heard you make some kind of suggestion that you might like me if you have dinner or something, and so that's an open invitation. Come to St. Louis.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyway, I want you to see what we're doing, because I think it's really important to get a grasp of the significance of what is happening to us, because you won't find another organization doing this, really transforming an impoverished community that's in a state of despair. I mean, we built a $60,000 basketball court in a place where black children are playing in the streets, dodging cars, going back and forth, using makeshift basketball hoops from bicycle rims and things like that. You would think that the city would be applauding us, the government would be and by the way, here's an irony, because they call this a food desert in North St. Louis where we live. And I think we got something like $80,000 or more dollars grant from the the FDA, to create and operate a farmers market there, which is one of the most effective farmers markets that they say that's happening in the country, that the FDA has sponsored. This is who we are. And this is part of the crime that's being committed against our community, our people, because this is self-determination, and that's the problem that they have, and that's the thing that the Democratic Party has, because it relies on having this relationship with black people who are tied to welfare slavery and not self-determination, and we won't tolerate that.
Amen. If you don't mind my asking, let me tell you why I'm asking. I want to ask how old you are, because I see this armored personnel carrier in front of your house. It looks like a war. And I see dozens of heavily armed FBI agents, and the presumption is that you're very dangerous. So to put that into perspective, how old are you?
I'm 82 years old. I was 82 in October. And that's why I say that this whole threat of a 15-year prison sentence is effectively a threat of a life sentence as it relates to me. There are other younger people like Penny Hess, who is a white woman and I'm wanting to mention that, who is chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and Jesse Neville, who is a youngster, who is the chair of an Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and they work primarily in the white community. And this concept, even of understanding who we are, like as quote unquote black nationalists, we are anti-colonialist forces, but we have organizations of white people in 117 cities in this country. And what these organizations are doing is they are taking the demand for reparation. They are taking the exposure of genocide. They're talking about the injustices committed against African people. So Penny Hess and Jesse Neville, they are heads of two of those organizations that are the front of our movement in the white community. So I just want to say that we are not race-based politics. Our politic is based on this fundamental relationship, because even the concept of race comes into existence through colonialism. We are anti-colonialists, and that's a change. I mean, because it doesn't mean that we haven't always been. I have been at one juncture seriously concerned about the question of race, because I took my examples of how to explain reality from what I learned from this system. And so racism and races and things like that. But even the concept of race denies me of a nationality, that I'm not even, a person that can be defined in relationship to a history of my own. It's a negation of my history, and even what the government has done in terms of charging me with being an agent of Russia. Like, we don't have agency as a people. I am one of the persons that was working against Joe Biden's notions. I participated in organizing people to register and vote, particularly in the state of Florida. I was in the United States military. I was there I was in Berlin. When the Berlin Wall went up, I was one of those forces in one of those tanks that faced one of the first times Russian and American tanks faced each other in a combat there. I was there. And I don't know where Biden was. I don't know where he was during that period. I was there, you see. And so this whole notion that somehow I'm being manipulated. And I mentioned the thing about Florida, because I was there when the Cuban crisis, missile crisis. Now I'm stationed in Georgia. And so they send a convoy of troops to go into Florida Fort Patrick, I think it was characterized as a Patrick Air Force Base in Florida. And I'm on a convoy. And I'm riding from Fort Benning, Georgia in a convoy, and we're driving down to this area near Cocoa in Florida. You know where I'm talking about. I think
Yes.
you live in Florida. And so we get to Palatka, Florida, and people get out on the convoy to go and eat in this restaurant. And we go in the restaurant, and the woman who's serving said, "We don't serve your kind." Talk about me. I'm in the U.S. military. I'm going to defend you, as you say, from the Cubans. Missiles, and then you say I can't eat there, but it was all right because my officer, the white officer, said, "Don't worry about it. We'll bring you something out." So this is the history that we're talking about, and so this notion, I don't know if the Russians ever had to experience that before. I don't think Russians ever had to do the kind of stuff and be threatened as I was in Madison, Florida, with lynching for taking black people to register and vote, or in Alachua County, where I was taking black people to register and vote. I don't know if Russians ever experienced that, and based on that, I don't see how the hell the Russians could be teaching me, leading me, like around this issue. So it's ridiculous on its face.
I think this is one of the most...
They would negate my history. That's part of what it is. They would negate the history of black people in this country, and a part of it is a negation of the history of the country itself. And this is part of what I mean in terms of, history. I mean, it can be unpleasant, but if we don't face it, if we don't look at it, we can never solve any real problems. That's one of the contradictions we're looking at right now in occupied Palestine. Look at the history. That's the thing about Ukraine and Russia. People can get misused, people die. We are facing a possible nuclear conflagration because of this falsified this story that they've invented about Ukraine, et cetera. It's ridiculous and it's dangerous. And that's one of the reasons I'm glad to have this discussion with you, and hopefully giving me access to people who I normally wouldn't be talking to.
I hope this is seen far and wide. So I'm grateful that you came on and talked to us, and Godspeed on your trial. It's
thank you so very
shocking.
much.
We'll be following
thank you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. The internet is crowded with interesting things that don't really matter. On TCN, we attempt to bring you interesting things that actually do matter, and a lot of them. Interviews, long form and short, videos, documentaries. You can find all of it on tuckercarlson.com, and we hope you will. Free speech is bigger than any one person or any one organization. Societies are defined by what they will not permit. What we're watching is the total inversion of virtue.